Welcome everyone. My name's John Sailing. I work at the Writers Guild. I wear a few different hats, but the ones principally concerned with today are those in relation to casework and campaigns. I've worked very closely with Nicola and the SOA to produce the Is It a Steal report, and I'm sure we'll cover in quite a lot of that in some detail. I'd like to now just have Nicola and Alysoun from the Writers, Alysoun, please introduce themselves. Nicola, if you could please go first.
Hi everyone, it's really nice to be here. I'm Nicola Solomon. I'm the Chief Executive of the Society of Authors. I'm a solicitor, and as John said, we work really closely together with this report, and we also had the support of ALCS in doing it. So we're really pleased to have done this together with the Writers Guild, and I'm sure we'll hear more later.
Hello, I'm Alysoun Owen, and I, as John has said, I'm the editor of the Writers and Artists Yearbook, the Big Red Book, the Bible, and also the sister edition, the green one, which is behind me, the Children's Writers and Artists Yearbook. And the yearbooks exist, as you may know, to support authors and illustrators to educate, to inform, to advise, and provide, I think, quite importantly, very much up-to-date information, and to be a barometer, if you like, of what's going on across the publishing and writing industries.
Wonderful, thank you, both of you. Right, I think what we'll do is we will just jump straight in then to having a bit of chat about the report and about what we're all here to discuss today. Just before we kick off, I think it's really useful just to put some things into context so that we do all understand what it is we're actually talking about. Would you please like to just, Nicola and Alysoun, give a brief explanation of what we understand when we're talking about hybrid publishers, or who it is we're actually referring to when we're reading the Is It a Steal report?
Yeah, I don't mind starting. And to say, John, that you and I and the teams had endless conversations about both what we were going to call this model of publishing and how we were going to try to explain to people, because it is not well understood, how this is different from both traditional publishing and self-publishing. So really, the first question is about where the money flows. It's not like traditional publishing, because this is where the author makes a contribution and typically is paying the whole of the cost of publication and the allied services that go with it. But it's not the same as self-publishing, because these publishers also take rights from the authors, like traditional publishers do, and they keep them, and they often say they're going to have a share, so that we had difficulty getting them back. So it's between the two models, but often is more expensive even than self-publishing. And it is, again, there is a huge range of self-publishing services. There's a huge range of hybrid publishing services in the way people describe themselves and what they actually do for that money. But pretty much our two tests were, if you are paying for it and rights are being taken, that was what we were investigating in this report.
Yeah, and I concur very much with Nicola, because I think one of the things that the report highlights, and you've just highlighted, is the use of language. And some of these organisations deliberately use certain terms themselves, so that can be confusing. So on those 2 points, that's absolutely crucial, because it's true. Self-publishing providers, so people who provide editorial services, production services, cover design, we're not talking about those organisations where you have a really transparent sense of what they are providing and you have an agreement that both parties are happy with. This is about organisations who, let's say, are unscrupulous and what we might in the past have called vanity publishers. But I think it is very difficult, because the term hybrid, we sometimes use that in other more positive contexts to talk about a hybrid author who might be publishing their print editions with a traditional publisher, say, and then maybe self-publishing their ebooks. So I think, as the report highlights, it's really important to look at those two aspects about where the rights sit and who's paying for the activity that's being done.
No, thank you both of you. Yeah, and I think just to kind of chip in again, I think, as Nicola said, we did have quite a lot of discussion over kind of the terminology we wanted to use, because we wanted to both reflect what was kind of out there within the industry and what was being used. But we're aware that actually kind of within the industry, several different terms that are used, be that hybrid, contributory, paid for publishing, and a whole host of others. So to try and actually get that kind of nail on the head there was initially, I think, a bit tricky.
And I might add that I was talking to the Independent Publishers Group recently, who told me that they do accept these people as part of the independent publishers, and they call them contract publishers. And my first thought was, that's a terrible name, because aren't all publishers contract publishers? But on the other hand, I thought that's really interesting, because that's like contract killers. And contract killers are people who have no personal interest in something, but do it for the money because you're paying them, but they're not taking a share, you know, they're not making the judgment as to whether this person deserves to be killed or not. And I thought in some ways it absolutely describes the model.
And might I just add, I think what we've managed to highlight there quite cleverly is the lack of consistency and the lack of regulation across this industry called publishing, because in a way the problematic word is publishing. You put publishing and you add an adjective to it, and it begins to look reputable, because we understand this world called publishing and we want to be part of it. So that's definitely one of the issues. And then that's why some of the recommendations in this report, which I know we're going to get onto, about being educated about what the universe looks like, so that one can start having one's antennae highly alert to scams, is part of the really important aspect that this report highlights as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much, both of you. I think that's really dealt with that pretty well. So I think this one's really for you, Nicola, but and I'll ask them as well when we come into it. But why is it? Why did we decide to look into this? What was it that led us to actually feel like, hold on a second, this is something that we really need to investigate and to look into a bit more?
Yes, I mean, it's a really good question, because we don't go around doing investigations every day of the week. I think we're all busy with our core work, but I had noticed a big rise. We have, as the Vice Guild does, contracts advice team, and we will advise people individually on any contract they send to us. And we were finding that more and more were these contracts, but that authors were not aware that they were not the traditional model, and also that very often it wasn't clear what they were being asked to pay, why, or we were getting complaints about bad service, or we were getting concerns that they were being missold or oversold, and perhaps to vulnerable people. And John and I, amongst others, meet very often in the Writers' Organisations Advisory Group, and I think I might have raised it then, and you commented that this is a tremendous problem for you as well. So I think we felt between us that, we hear about bad publishers, we hear about concerns about not good service companies, but this was seemed to be so widespread in this model that we wanted to investigate further.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just add to that is that, I think you're absolutely right. We at the Writers Guild noticed kind of an uptick of the number of items that were just coming to me to look at, to deal with writers, authors who had paid to have their work published, but then weren't receiving any form of royalties. They wanted to get out of the deals. They then found they couldn't. They then found they had their rights tied up. A lot of the times they're unable to extract themselves. In some instances, publishers are saying, well, you can get out of the deal, but you're going to need to pay us a little bit more. And there were just so many issues that were coming up from so many different quarters around these types of deals. I think the reason we kind of initially wanted to do something about this as well is so we could quantify it a little bit more as well. Because at that time we only had kind of our anecdotal evidence from those members who'd come to us with problems, and then we wanted to sit down and actually investigate a little bit more how widespread and how deep rooted this problem was within the industry. And I think that that's what's really kind of kick-started this, and why how it ended up leading to the report that we then published.
And in fact, to be fair, I think it's just worth saying we also wanted to know, because obviously people come to us, they come to us generally neutrally. Most people who are coming to us thought that these were good deals, but people also come to us with problems. And I'm very well aware that people come to it. So we wanted to know also if, for example, there was widespread satisfaction. That was an interesting question for us as well, because it could have been that we were just seeing the bad eggs, but it certainly didn't turn out to be that way.
Yeah, Alysoun, does that sound reflective of some of the things you kind of hear within the industry, or have you got
Yes, very much so. I mean, I guess mine is more at an anecdotal level in terms of people writing to us, people emailing us, chatting through us through our site. And there definitely seems to have been an increase. And I think one of the reasons for that has been possibly lockdown and people thinking, I now want to get my book out there, but actually social media. So, you know, the better than, you know, too good to be true type of deals, which are spamming people through social, I think has had a part in that. And I think, you know, that people come to the Writers and Artists Yearbook to get endorsements in a way, although we don't officially endorse. The reason why we actually publish every year and we look at every single entry that we include every single year is because people come in and people come out depending on their credentials, and we do look at everybody. And I think, I don't need to name the names, but there's 2 of the 3 companies that are named in this report who, when I took over 7 to 8 years ago, were advertisers, and all I'm telling you is the next year they weren't advertisers because I dropped them. So I think it's really important, and whenever we get feedback, I go back to the organisations themselves and ask them to comment. And it's quite interesting, the sort of silence that is a response to some of my questioning. So yeah, I think it is on the increase, and I guess because there's so many options available and so many avenues that you can be spammed with, that knowing the issues behind all the different kinds of organisations and being able to kind of interrogate themselves becomes increasingly important, I think, for the individual writer.
So when we're talking about kind of these publishers, hybrid publishers that are kind of causing these problems for our members and for authors, what are kind of the key things that people need to look out for when presented with a deal, or that kind of gives them a bit of a tip off that actually these may be actors who aren't acting entirely in good faith? What are the key things to look out for, do you think?
Shall I start? One of the things, interestingly, that you and I, someone commented to you and I today, John, was advertising. And this is really problematic because, a bit as Alysoun was saying, but even more so, many people wrote a lot more during lockdown, or pulled out the things that they'd written years ago and suddenly thought, maybe I'll try to publish this. So these are people who are very unsophisticated, they're not professional writers, and actually they just sort of want to see their books out there. So what do you do these days? You will Google it, and traditional publishers do not advertise. They have enough submissions already, as do agents. And consequently, you are stuck with a situation whereby if you Google publishers or publish my book, the very first thing, and indeed the only thing that will come up, is these paid for publishers. And I think that in itself has caused a problem. So the first thing to do is be wary of anyone who advertises and go to much more respected sources like the Writers and Artists Yearbook, where you'll find a range of people who aren't specifically advertising. But then it's a question of really unpicking the promises that are being made to you, what's being offered, and starting by thinking about why you want to publish. Because if what you want is to make money from publishing, this is not a good place to start. The place to start is to go to traditional publishers and agents and see if they'll accept your book and pay you in advance and pay the money and publish it for you. Or if you are extremely savvy and know how to do it, to go to a self-publishing route, buying in the services you need and doing it yourself. It's harder, but some people can do really well from it. But this isn't the place to be starting. But if you've decided for some reason to go with neither of those, or no one's offering you a traditional publishing deal, I would then say again, if you want to make money out of it, take the view that traditional publishers are very commercially minded, and consequently actually ask yourself, if your book isn't commercial and you're trying to make money out of it, that's going to be a very uphill struggle. If you're doing it for other reasons, though, because you want your family to see it, or you want it to be published, or you want it to be out there, that's fine. But then make sure that these services provide what you want in a transparent way, that they tell you exactly what it's going to be costing, and they tell you what they're going to do for it. And do not be persuaded by weasel words. And a few weasel words that we see all the time. First of all, incredibly flattering letters about how wonderful your book is. You know, it's very hard to overlook someone who loves your book that much, but sometimes you have to. And the word that many of them use, I see a lot, and that can really concerned about, is up to. We will publish up to 1,500 copies of your book. That does not mean we will publish 1,500 copies of your book. It usually means we'll print on demand 5 copies of your book. Yeah. So it's just about working out exactly what's being promised, if it does it for you, what rights are being taken, and then do what you would do for any other major purchase. Do your research, look at reviews, ask to look at other books that have been published, ask how many they've sold, ask to see the quality of everything, and ask the critical question that came out of this report. Do you make most of your money from selling books, or do you make most of your money from payments from authors?
Yeah, I think Nicola has covered that beautifully, but I think some of the words that I would highlight are transparency and clarity. Those are absolutely, and the report highlights those, absolutely crucial. And with the yearbook, for our publisher section, and also indeed for our agent section, we are really rigorous about making sure that anybody who's listed there is not somebody you give money to, is not an organisation that you hand money over to. They are responsible for taking any financial risk, and they will do a legitimate contractual deal with you. So I think some of the things to look out for are a very thin contract or no contract, obfuscation, lack of clarity on cost. One of the really, really key questions to ask is, what marketing sales are you doing to support my book? The most important thing for a book, apart from writing it, is that you can get it into the hands of readers. And I think that is one of the things we forget about very easily. We get very excited about a book being taken on and the thought that it's going to be produced, and let's say they even produce it in a nice way, although some of them don't, but how on earth does it reach the market? And I think that's crucial, that they're also possibly either not mentioning that at all or making promises about that. And again, as Nicola says, getting some evidence that supports the promises they're making. And so really, you know, it does come back down to absolute transparency, asking as many questions as you like. And if you don't get answers to those questions, that in itself provides you a sense of the organisation's or the business's inability to engage with you sufficiently, I think.
Yeah, thank you both of you. And I think, you know, I'll just add to that, because I think you both covered it quite comprehensively there. I mean, ultimately, if it sounds too good to be true, then the chances are it probably is. If you've got a company who are saying that they are going to be able to sell thousands of copies of your book, often they'll rely on terminology suggesting that because you're a risk, that's why you need to stump up financially so that they can cover their costs, and you share the risk. You know, they often try to make that quite a key point. The risk is being shared. Now, I think from my point of view is whenever people are asked to make financial investments, normally there's some form of regulation that goes along with that, but there isn't in this case. There's no kind of regulation in respect to kind of these financial investments, in the same way that if you bought stocks or shares, you know, you go through the FCA. This doesn't have that kind of backstop to it. So I think just be very, very careful where, like I said, I think as Nicola says, if you're getting very, very flattering letters telling you your book is wonderful and how everyone should read it, you know, they're going to be telling you the things you want to hear, but what they're really trying to do there is give you a sales pitch, so that you part with your money and go with them. Again, I think, you know, the key thing is always look at those contracts, get them checked by the Writers Guild or Society of Authors, because we'll be able to help you unpick and untangle and advise you on where it is they're good, where often, more often than not, they're actually not so good.
Could I add one thing, and just following on from what Nicola said about knowing what it is you want, so not being forced down a particular route that isn't what you actually want. So thinking, do I want somebody to do a beautiful production of my book, and do I want my book in print, and do I want it in ebook, and do I want it in audio, or do I actually want somebody to sell my book, or do I need somebody to do a cover? So what is it, what are the skills that I don't have myself, or the time I don't have, that I want somebody else to do? So I think we do need to be really careful about clarifying that we're not talking about legitimate organisations who are set up to provide services, and they may be individuals like you might find through readsy.com, or they may be companies that provide that whole thing. So again, it's sort of understanding what is being offered and if you want it, and what the cost around that is. And I think that is, and it's really difficult with the use of language. Partnership publishing, there are areas of the industry where that is legitimate. So it's where an organisation might work with a charity, might work with a business, and they do share costs but it's highly transparent. It's a clear sense of who owns what, i.e. the person writing the book, or still holds on to the right. So I think, it is a difficult industry to navigate, and being, maybe we'll have to keep reviewing the terminology year in, year out to see what falls under particular headings.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the point you made around clarity as well, which I think is quite an important one. I think what we find as well is often these kind of agreements aren't particularly clear as to which services or which aspects of the publishing processes are being provided. Often they will try to bundle them all together into one, and it then makes it very, very difficult from kind of our perspective to try and then claim a breach of contract has taken place, because it doesn't specify particularly clearly within the contract what it is that they're actually offering you, or what has been promised to you as an author. So always, again, the devil is always in those details. It's good to get that checked.
And I would add something to that as well. If you have been traditionally published before, one of the things that's really problematic about these contracts is that they don't look that different from traditional contracts. Now, traditional contracts are a bit deficient because they tend not to say what the publisher will do. It's something we've never really liked. They do tend to say all details of publication will be with the publisher, including the quality, the marketing, the editing, whatever. So people are saying, well, why are you picking up on these when they're no different from traditional? But the difference is that if a publisher is paying you and is taking the risk, then it has got an interest in selling books. So although we would prefer it explains in detail, and we do suggest to people they get marketing plans, what it's going to do, frankly, it's going to do some work, because why would it be putting money into it if it doesn't sell it? But because these publishers, this is what I meant about contract killers, because these publishers already had their money from you, they don't have anything like the same incentive to sell the books. And that's why the contracts can look exactly the same, and why you need really good advice and thought about it. And the other thing I would say is, don't be grateful. Because actually, probably if you've gone to these, you've gone down a traditional route and they haven't published you, the words like hybrid and partnership and subsidy all suggest that you need to be grateful because the publisher is putting in something. But in all these deals I've seen, or the very vast majority, the author is covering all the costs. They tend to say we are covering half the cost, but if you actually ask them to break down from the true cost of publishing that book, whether they are providing anything, they are not.
No, thank you very much for that. I think we've covered kind of what the issue was there, and kind of why we decided we wanted to look into it. Nicola, can you, and I'll chip in again as well on this when it's my point, but can you just take us through kind of the report's findings, kind of the executive summary, and what it is we actually found when we did look into these problematic publishers?
I had this sort of temptation to go, we found it was all fabulous and this is really a very different type of session, but no, it was extremely concerning. The overall view really was, well, the big, I think, finding that comes out and hits you in the face is that 94% of the writers who put money in did not make that money back. The median amount that people paid was about £2,000, and the median royalties they got from all the sales was £68. So that is the median figures for both. And then so you need to know that even with those who are good and transparent, most people are not going to make back the money they put into it. And our concerns also were that satisfaction was really low. And I think the satisfaction levels were, they were higher than we expected actually, but they were around 50%. But as I've often said, this is a service you are paying for, and I think that you would not buy a service that only had 2.5 stars, or that only 50% of people had said that they were happy with. We found there was that right across the board, the services were not good, that people found it hard to get their rights back, that they weren't kept informed, and as I say, that the model did not fulfill their expectations. And then we added to a new, it came from the survey, but from ourselves, that the contracts were not transparent, that people did not know what they could expect from them. I think, John, you can probably add a bit more of the many findings in our questions, which you and I have trawled through with agony, graph by graph, for a long time.
Yes, no, we did quite a lot of that, didn't we, Nicola? I think two of the things additionally which I'd pick up on there is that a lot of the books that went out via these publishers did not end up on bookshelves. They did not find their way into the Waterstones or into the WH Smiths or into the supermarket bookshelves, which was, I think, by and large, the expectation of many of the people who'd signed up for this. I think the actual stat from the responses we got was 59% of people said their book did not end up on bookshelves. That's because what often happens is, in order to keep their costs down, these publishers will operate a print-on-demand model, where basically they print off a single volume of the book, a single copy of the book, when they get that order for all the books. They don't bulk print the books. They just print off the individual book as it's sold, and that, again, like I said, it keeps their costs down a little bit. It keeps their profits high from the money you've paid them.
And I should say on that a promise we often see that they make to you is they will be available to bookshops, and what that means is, we'll send them a press release saying it's available, or simply because it's on Amazon they can order them from distributors, but they're not going to. That's not at all the same thing.
Yeah. So sorry, Alysoun, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we have to be a little bit careful about that, because it is about managing expectations, and it's about managing writer expectations, illustrator expectations, and that's what we see. Writer and artist is really about that, actually, because it's true, not every, still use the word, traditional published book ends up in a bookshop. In fact, a huge number don't, and a lot because they're not for that market. That's one thing. So it might be an academic book, and it might be you only order it direct when you need it. And the very obvious thing, when you go and see how many shelves there are across all the bookshops that are sitting across this country, it doesn't take a mathematician to realise you could not possibly have every single book that's published, even in 1 year, let alone the backlist, sitting on those shelves. So it isn't true that every single book that's published goes into a bookshop. I think what it is, it's about, again, coming back to that word clarity and transparency, what your promise is. If you're promising something that you cannot provide, that's a very different issue. And what you really need to do is go and read the Writer and Artist Yearbook. I'm doing yet another plug because I've got the forum.
Well,
we have
great.
a wonderful
Everyone
article actually written by a bookseller. If you are a self-published author, what you should do to go and get your book stocked in your local bookshop, your local Indie or Waterstones. So it is possible, but it might not be something that a provider supports you with. You might have to do it yourself. So again, it's who does what, and managing those expectations, I think, is really, really key.
No, thank you. Yeah. All right. And I think the other thing that I'd pick up from the report as well, one of the other things we found that actually this wasn't an issue which was restricted to one or two rogue actors. Of the 240 responses we got from the survey, 91 different publishers were named, and that's not just within the UK. That's all over the world as well. This isn't just a UK only issue. I'd say. But I think that just shows that there is real proliferation there of these companies who are operating by some of these methods. And I think that can really, again, make it difficult for you to kind of cut through actually what it is that's being offered and understand, you know, why perhaps it is not always that beneficial. Because if you see it all over the place, you then just begin to think that that's the norm, that it's acceptable. I think what we want to say very much now is that actually get these things checked. Or, you know, if you're not going to be, if you're in it to make that money, to raise your profile as a writer, chances are this isn't the way to do that. And you need to be clear that that's the case.
And I think Alyson's talked about different types of publishing. This was basically trade publishing that we were looking at, because, as I said, things like poetry do have quite different models, and you need to talk to others about how that works. But the other key finding that I think we should just pick up on is 48% of writers said that they wouldn't recommend their publisher to others. 48%. Now, I know everyone falls out with their publisher at some time, but that is, you know, that's huge, really, and concerning. Again, when you've paid the money, I think it's, these people are, whatever they say, providing a service, and that is not a good level of service satisfaction.
Okay, so we've gone through kind of why we did it, what led us to do this work, what we found. So what was coming out of the report then, Nicola? What were the recommendations that we've kind of put out there for authors, for publishers, and for other organisations within the industry?
Yeah, so we did a series of recommendations for authors that you've seen. We did a series of recommendations for publishers, suggesting that they should sign up to 15 principles, which are basically, as you say, around clarity, and so that they should commit to them. And our 15 principles, without going through them, are really that you should be clear about your business model from the outset. You should provide detailed information as to where you get your money from, because I think, as I said before, that is the key. You should give consumer rights notices. These are consumer contracts, and people should have a right to withdraw within 14 days. You should be absolutely transparent about the costing and the predicted return on investment. Traditional publishers do that. They'll tell you what they think you'll get. And even if it's within a range, and if you are charging, all the charges should be clear up front. There should be a rate card of what the charges are, and they should not change throughout. And then you must have the skills. And this publishing, as Alysoun said, and this is where people say, publishing is not printing. Publishing is adding editing, design, production, sales, storage, distribution. These are the added values that a traditional publisher can put in. And and you've got to make sure that they've got significant experience in all of those and in selling rights. I mean, most of these organizations do not have any sub-rights selling experience. You should check that they have it. There should be a marketing plan and a budget for everything. Again, Alysoun talks about what type of formats. Some of these contracts don't even tell you how they're going to publish, so you need to know, are they going to be ebook, are they going to be audio, is there going to be physical, is it going to be a hardback, is it going to be print on demand, what's going to be done? And then clear contracts, financial clarity, good practice in best practice, selling sub-rights, which means selling rights in foreign rights in other territories, translation rights, quotation rights, for example, the whole bundle of contract rights, copyright rights that come with books. And then just things we don't expect everyone to do, crediting the author, being clear, answering follow-up inquiries, being clear in your accounts, and reverting rights if when everything comes to an end. That's a quick whiz through. I think that both Alysoun and John can probably add a bit to what we wanted for others. And then the final thing you asked about other organisations, asking other organisations not to give legitimacy to some of these companies.
I just wanted to, just on that issue of sub-rights or other rights. So when we're talking about these and what we're terming the hybrid, the bad boys in the room, if you like, that if they're taking asking you to pay and then they're taking your rights, that means you cannot exploit them yourself. And that's in terms of subsidiary rights. They've taken the right to do with your content whatever they want. And that's one of the things we need to avoid, or you need to avoid, because sub-rights is often, and certainly in traditional publishing, it's where the money can be made, because you do the initial publication and then you're selling translation rights and all that sort of thing. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I think from my perspective, I'm not a lawyer, and Writers and Artists is very much about supporting writers and illustrators. So I'm really keen on those top 5 in terms of the recommendations to writers. And I sound a bit like an old record going round and round, but it is very much about educating yourself or finding information, and taking time to do that. And as Nicola said much earlier, asking other people, looking at things. If you look at a book and it looks pretty shoddily edited, or it's got a terrible blurb on the back, or it's not a very cover, you probably don't want those sort of people to publish your book anyway, or to support you in publishing. So there's a kind of quality control there. And also coming back to the kind of self-publishing, a lot of the people who work in the self-publishing part of the industry are people who have honed their skills in mainstream publishing, because the skills are exactly the same. You still need to have a well-edited book, you need to have a well-designed book, and all those sorts of things. But often with these sort of hybrid bad players, they're not necessarily people who even have publishing skills. They're coming with a business proposition. So that's another reason why it might be a good idea to avoid them as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alysoun. I think you're right, particularly about picking up about what it is they're actually doing, what it is they're actually bringing to the table, particularly in terms of things like editing, proofreading, formatting, and all the rest of it. It always reminds me of a story that Books Chair Nick Yap told me. He was looking at reading a series of books for one of our awards from one of these hybrid publishers, and the first line on the first page was, "His arms hung by his side as he waved his wife goodbye." And you could just tell, just from that one sentence there, that clearly it hadn't been properly edited, it hadn't been properly looked at, and it had been allowed to go out just with that. So checking all of these things, I think the recommendations of the report are quite clear, particularly for authors. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, and if you don't know, if you're at all unsure, check with the Society of Authors or check with the Writers Guild, and we will provide you with that advice. That's what we're here to do. It's what we're there for. I'll pick up on what we're kind of asking for some of the other organisations, I think.
It's also fair to say, just while we're talking to our 2 organisations, I'm sure you do this as we do, we get a lot of phone calls in from people who are not yet members asking about these companies and these contracts. We will always mention on the phone, you don't have to pay your joining fee before we'll say, I really don't think this is the contract for you. If you want us to go further, you'd have to pay, but don't be afraid to ask our helplines for free advice early on.
Yeah, we provide kind of that general advice, and so the exact sort of things we've said already kind of today, which is that if you're paying for it and you're giving up rights, you need to have a very careful look at whether or not you're going to get that return on investment. I'd be very, very cautious about having a look at it. If you want us to look at it in great detail, then please do join. We'll be able to give you a kind of a line by line of the contract, and where we think there are issues there.
Could I also mention the Alliance of Independent Authors, Ally? I don't know if there's anybody here from that organisation, but it's mentioned in the report.
Orna was meant to be joining us, but apparently got the date wrong. I've just seen an email from her saying she thought she was a month later.
It does mention their watchdog, which is exactly as it says. It looks out for rogue players, and they do a really good publication that you can download for free. You don't have to be a member from their website. I don't unfortunately have the name of it on me, but there's also an American website which is really good about keeping au fait with some of the rogue players, and I can send that to John, and that could be circulated. So I think, so it's about real time, because every time it's like whack-a-mole, isn't it? So every time that you whack one down, another one will pop up. So this is not just about some of the players that we're specifically mentioning now, it's about thinking about the other people who are going to come into that space. And again, with an unregulated as it is at the moment, and what we'd like to lead to something where it becomes much more regulated, that it is about doing self-regulation, if you like, and back to that word, educate, really.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I think that's it in terms of kind of our kind of discussion bit now. If there's anything else either you'd like to add, if not, we can throw it open to questions from the floor. if you just like to type your questions into the chat box, we can then have a look at those and hopefully answer away.
I think there's a couple of questions in the chat already, John.
Okay.
The first one I thought was, did you include crowdfunding publishers in your investigation? Which I probably answered. We didn't specifically, but we did make it clear it's about paying. I mean, it is a very different model. I don't know about you, John, but we at the Society of Authors are looking at it quite closely. We are actually in correspondence with Unbound at the moment. We are not concerned about crowdfunding generally as a way to raise money, but we are concerned about crowdfunding publishers where we think that there is a mixture of two things that should be quite different, and where there are some real fiduciary issues besides anything else. And it is a model that is open to confusion and lack of transparency and exactly the same criticisms as came up in this report, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think I've not got anything more to add on that. I think I just completely agree with everything you've just said there, Nicola. Thank you.
Well, I might slightly disagree, but I'd be really interested in what your findings are in discussing with them, because I would argue it is fairly transparent, the model, and they definitely do, in the case of Unbound, have editorial rigorousness. But I can see that there is I wouldn't call it a conflict of interest, but it doesn't follow very obviously, because it's a new kind of model, the traditional model. So there is, but the funding comes from potential readers. So anyway, but I'd be really interested to hear more once your discussions with them have
I mean, just to kind of open this one out a little bit, I think in a very similar way to the way in which the term hybrid has been used as kind of an obfuscation around some of the practices of some of these publishers. I think my concern is that crowdfunding could end up in a similar kind of position, and I think that's kind of the forewarning I think that we're kind of coming to it with. It's like it may be okay, but we need to kind of see a little bit about how it really plays out before we can really kind of say, okay, yes, this is okay, because I imagine what we're likely to do is we're still going to get the bad faith actors who then look to try and take advantage of a legitimized term.
And I think it's really important, because it is quite new, that people understand what it is that they're bringing to the party, which is a large platform. So you know that's a bit different. So again, you really need to educate yourself if you're going to be doing that, and you really need to know what's going to rise from it. I'm going to read through the other questions because I think John's got a slight problem reading them. I mean, some of them are comments, but I think they're interesting anyway. Sue said, when I heard an offer from a hybrid company, the letter didn't mention I would have to make a contribution. The contract that then followed was dense, but the contributory element came towards the end, and I didn't see any mention of them keeping the rights to my work. So that is really typical. Some do tell you you'll have to pay. Many of them advertise as if they were traditional publishers, and then say, but in your case, we think we could make it better by doing X, Y, and Z. And if you were to contribute £3,000, that would make your book so much better and so likely to sell. And that is, again, something that really concerns us.
And I think, just to jump in there, I think one of the things we've said within the report is actually, some of the hybrid publishers that we pointed at aren't at all transparent about the fees that they charge. There's nothing on their websites about what it is going to cost you. They may mention that they're a hybrid or they're a contributory publisher, but there's no detail about actually what that means for you. And it's only when they've managed to kind of get kind of sink their teeth in a little bit and kind of praise your book, tell you how wonderful they think it is, that then comes the, oh, and now you have to pay a little bit, which is the thing to always look out for. Really, because if someone's telling you at the late stage that you're going to need to part with your money, they've not been upfront about that is, that's where I have a real concern, I think.
And I think we can say very openly, Austin Macaulay, who is criticised for this in our report, their immediate response to the report was, yes, we've been redoing our website we meant to redo our website during lockdown, but we haven't quite got round to it yet, which I thought was not the greatest response, to be fair. And Richard then says, my late father wanted to publish his book via fantasy publisher, which cost him £8,000, and he sold 6 books. I then contacted them and advised them that I'm the beneficiary of those books and ex-special forces, and I never heard from them again. Maybe, Richard, we should all try that. So, and Sue said not only do the books not get into shops, but when they can be ordered online, my research found that there were no synopses with the listings on websites. And certainly I've had concerns about listings on websites. And Sue asked what sub-rights are, but Alysoun explained that beautifully, I think, then. And I think that's all the questions we've got in the chat. So if anyone else has got anything they want to add, either put it in chat or Q&A or hands up, I think, at this point. Oh, you were so quiet. Not like my members.
Can I just add, I think that's a really good point that Sue makes about where the book appears, and it comes back to that point I made earlier about getting into the hands of your readers, and whether that's reader or somebody listening through an audio. You know, again, we have certain expectations about what we'd expect to see online or what we expect to see in a bookshop. So I guess it's also saying, and it's difficult, I appreciate it's difficult, you know, saying, how are you going to do online? Give me an example of a book that you've already sold. What does that look like? Show me the synopsis, or show me the blurb, or show me, where are you putting on Amazon? Where else does it go? It's absolutely right to kind of ask as many questions as you like, and you should ask lots of questions. And you know, how is it going to be distributed around the world, even if it's just an ebook, or even it's a print book, or whatever format it happens to be in. And because there are organisations that will do those sort of things for you, it is relatively easy to put your book up on Amazon and have it with a really nice blurb and details. But if you don't know how to do it, then it's very difficult. So, you know, again, go and find books, go and find websites, talk to these organisations, talk to fellow authors, and you'll sure as hell find out what hasn't worked for certain people, because they're very happy to share that, and, you know, build up networks of those organisations to avoid.
And in fact, building up networks and building up communication and doing things through your unions is such good advice anyway for every aspect of this, to find good services, to work out who's the right publisher, to work out how to help market your work, and to just stop being lonely, which is in itself a very lonely profession. And Richard's asked, is there a clear distinction between self-publishing and hybrid publishing? So, as I think we've all explained, there is a huge range of what people call themselves, but the difference to us, for the way we defined it, but as I say, that is not by any means the way everyone defines themselves, is we would call self-publishing and self-publishing services when you directly and clearly pay for services, but you keep all the rights. Whereas a hybrid, they tend to take the rights as well as you having to pay. But I think Alysoun and John would probably have things to add to that. And as I say, that's just, it's by no means an industry where it's the case that it is what it says on the tin. It says all sorts of things on the tin, and it might be all sorts of other things.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in on this, but we just say, I think, you know, self-publishing is a perfectly fine model. I don't have any problem with self-publishing. I think it's actually, you know, the way in which a lot of the industry may well be going, given advances in technology and such like. But the key distinction is that transfer of rights. When you are a self-publisher, you keep all the rights, you get to decide what happens to it. Now, it's perfectly understandable that self-published authors or self-publishing authors may not have necessarily all those skills in terms of formatting, typesetting, editing and proofreading. I mean, often we'd say, actually, you're probably better off getting someone else to edit or proofread your book, because you're going to be so close to it, you're not going to be able to really see where there may be issues or where there may be problems with the manuscript. So the key thing is there, though, when you're self-publishing, and there are, you know, I call them skills gaps, where there are those gaps, you can pay to have someone else come and fill those in for you. With a lot of these hybrid publishers, they purport to then fill in those gaps. They often don't do a particularly great job, but then you lose your rights as well. So you're unable to then kind of take it away and do other things that you would otherwise want to with them. I think it's all often a case more expensive as well to go with a hybrid publisher than it is to go via self-publishing. So I think those to me are the clear distinctions there. If you're not sure, if you've got a deal, if you want someone to come at you and you're not sure if you've got self-publishing or hybrid publishing deal there, ask us, send it to us, and we'll look.
Always ask, and you know, ask us, and look at whether they are in the Writers and Artists Yearbook. Look at the Ally Rogues Gallery, and Jacob has also given us another useful link, which is Writers Beware, which is the Science Fiction Writers of America's red flag section, and they give you some red flags and case studies on these issues, which are worth checking out. And although that's really helpful, Jacob, because although it's an American company, what we also found is that most of these companies are international, and in fact that they are, you know, they may appear that they're based in the UK, but they often aren't. Another thing that you will see is what sounds like swanky London addresses, but actually they're not based in London either. So offering to go and visit them is quite a good test as well, I would say. Or
yeah, definitely
driving past and having a look at whether
service apartments. I think there was also, under lockdown, there was a proliferation of organisations. I think most of them were based in the Philippines, and they just kept popping up overnight, where they would use a reputable company's name. So it might become Penguin, and some, you know, they would be using legitimate publishers' names and adding something on, like the word services or provider, or changing one letter. And so, you know, one had to be really, really wary of that. And that's really difficult to navigate that, but just be really wily. And if you're going to ask a question and then ask the question again and look at the URL and all of that kind of thing. But there are some kind of sneaky little players out there. There really are. And some are out and out corrupt, and others perhaps not so. But and I would make just coming back to the self-publishers and what they do, it doesn't mean if you're called a self-publisher or a self-publisher provider or an independent person who provides self-publishing services that you're good. So you still have to kind of navigate that and think, is that what I want? They're offering to do everything for me, but all I want them to do is copy edit my book. Price is also an interesting thing, because although John's right, some of these big players are charging quite a lot, it is actually quite expensive to produce a book if you're doing it properly. So even if you're going down the self-publishing, to get an editor, to get a proofreader, to get somebody who's going to do an index, you know, that does mount up. So that isn't totally a reflection of who these players are. So it's not very helpful in some ways to say carry on navigating it, but these are some of the really key points. And I would go back to the point that you both made, that it definitely is about taking somebody's rights and asking them for their money as well at the same time. That double whammy, that is a big no-no.
And I think the points have been made about services, and you know how hard it is to do it yourself and to find it here, because to self-publish from scratch, if you're buying in services, you may be doing masses of research as to best editors, best marketers, whatever, and you know, your answer may be, if I knew all that about publishing a book and what was needed, I'd be a publisher. So so I can see the attraction of a one-stop shop, and it's really and why people are doing it. But again, this comes back to working out what your needs are first, and the best way to do that is to talk to fellow writers. And if you don't know fellow writers, the best way to do that is to join one of your unions and meet up with them and network, or go to literary events, or to look at the great advice online. And I completely endorse that the Writers and Artists Yearbook has great advice, but don't start from nothing and try and think it's okay. And certainly the other thing Michelle here is giving us, I'm not going to give the whole details, but a whole story of, let's look at all these of a contract she looked at, and where she had to challenge really all the clauses, and then in the end didn't go ahead. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of disappointment if you don't go ahead. So going in, you know, doing the research before you even speak to them, before you get to the contract stage, does make sense, because you'll save yourself a lot of time.
I think we're at time. I'd just like to thank Alysoun and Nicola for coming along today and for giving up their time to talk about the report, and to talk about the issues within the industry, and to talk about the report.